Happy Sunday, friends! This is our first magical movie review. Tonight we're doing Snow White, hence the do here. I don't Disney bound. That's not really something that I'm very good at or have a lot of experience in, but I do try to do some casual Disney bounds or Disney style, especially when I go to the parks or do stuff like this. So got the blue going on. I've got my red Uniglitter. I think I tried to put some yellow in there too, because I didn't really, because she's got like the yellow sleeves, Snow White, so I wanted to kind of throw that in there. And of course my top knot headband from Pretty Paper Trails. You can find them on Instagram and Etsy. I like to do these every Sunday. This is something that new that I'm starting. If you follow me on Instagram at Magic by Molly or Magic X Molly, people call it a couple different things. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. But this is something that I've been wanting to do. I love Disney movies. I grew up on them. I also just love movies in general and all things magic. So, of course, that gives you this. Coming to you from my Harry Potter themed office, I do love all things magical on both the Disney and Harry Potter Wizarding World side. So that's what I decided to theme my office after. So if you're looking in the background and you notice anything, that's where that's coming from. I also have two cats, one big orange fluffy cat named Tina, and my tiny little baby buddy. His name is Felix, after Felix Felicis, of course. So if you see them pop up, I don't like to keep my office closed because of course they cry and I love them, so they'll probably just be special guests. I'm actually surprised that one of them's not back there already. So let's get started. First movie on my list to review, of course, is Disney's Snow White, film released in 1937. So this is an oldie but goodie. And just to recap for anybody who hasn't seen the movie in a while or at all, this movie starts with the evil queen. She has a looking glass that she peers into and says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all?" And of course he says Snow White. So Snow White is her stepdaughter. They clearly don't have a good relationship. Evil queen decides, hey, best way to become fairest of all is to murder or have Snow White murdered. So she sends Mr. Huntsman out and says, hey, BT Dubs, I want you to kill this young girl who's, what, I think she's maybe 15 or 16, and bring me back her heart so that I know you did it. He's like, cool, got it. So he takes her to the woods. Snow White's like frolicking, gathering some flowers, you know, what normal 16-year-old girls do. And she turns around, he's got the knife, he's like, ah, and then he says, oh wait, I can't do it, you should run because your stepmother's trying to kill you. So she's like, peace, I'm out, starts running through the woods, goes through all kinds of hell, trees are trying to grab her mysteriously, they grow hands. Then she stumbles, starts crying, finds animal friends, of course, like every Disney princess does, and she befriends them, says, can't sleep on the ground, where am I supposed to sleep tonight? They lead her to the Seven Dwarfs cottage, or we don't know that yet. They lead her to a mysterious cottage in the woods, walks in, she sees all kinds of little tiny appliances and furniture, and she just assumes, hey, a bunch of orphan children live here, so I can take care of them. So she and the woodland creatures clean up the house, start making dinner. Of course, this is exhausting because, you know, she's a woman. So she goes to sleep. She has to lay across 3 of the beds because they're just so small. And then we cut to the dwarves. They're doing their hi-ho, hi-ho. They come on home. They realize that the lights are on and they're like, hey, somebody broke in. So they go in, find her asleep, They kind of talk it out. They're terrified of her, but she says, hey, I will cook, clean, sew, do whatever you need to do if you let me stay here. So they're like, that seems fair. They fall in love with her in a platonic way, I'm sure a little bit romantic way too. But they say, like, they kind of share stories. She tells them about the prince. They sing and dance, go to sleep, wake up the next day. They have to go to work, of course, because they're men, mining, and who they're selling these gems to, I don't know, but Doc is very particular about what gem goes in what bag. And they tell Snow White, hey, don't let anybody in. Seems like a simple enough request. 1, for her safety. 2, it's their house, so you shouldn't let strangers into somebody else's house. So they go off, they do their thing, and of course, we cut back to the evil queen. She does the whole who's the fairest of them all thing. Finds out that she's still alive, even though the huntsman brought her back a heart. She figures out it's a pig's heart. So she says, you know what? Can only trust yourself, about to do this girl in. So, of course, she decides to poison her with an apple, finds the cottage in the woods, transforms herself into a peddler, then goes and finds her in the woods, convinces Snow White to take a bite of this apple. Snow White passes out. Or dies, supposedly. All we really see is like a hand flapping. They don't actually show the death or the poison, probably because this is 1937 and anything higher than the ankles is XXX rated. So then the woodland creatures, while all the murder is trying to happen, they decide to run after the dwarves. They go get them, bring them back. It's too late, unfortunately. So they decide, instead of burying her, to put her in a glass case of emotion so that they can just stare at her dead body. Cool. Probably a couple days later, because it isn't quick to make a glass coffin, Prince shows up in the woods, kisses her on the mouth. Kind of concerning because this girl has been laid out for a couple of days and they assume she's dead, so she's probably a little crusty at this point. Kisses her anyway, whatever. They had a passing early on. And she wakes up and he professes his love to her, and of course they run away together. The end. Cool. So, while the recap, of course, sounds sarcastic, I actually do enjoy this movie. There's a couple things that I like really honed in on, and for this segment, for this episode of Magical Movie Review, I decided to call the good things, like my top 3 or 4 things that I really loved about the film, happies, and then the things that I thought were just a little bit ridiculous or silly or just not so great things, dopies. Not to say that dopey is a bad thing, I just thought it was a fun play on words. So, of course, the happies. We'll start with that. One thing that I really love about Snow White is the soundtrack. It's classic. I find myself singing along, like, even though I haven't watched this movie in a hot minute, I seem to remember all the words. Specifically to Someday My Prince Will Come. I was singing along in speaking the dwarves part as well. Like, there's this section of the song where she's like, and she fell in love. Was it hard to do? Like, it's clearly been engraved into my brain to remember these songs and the scenes in which the songs are in, and remember where they are. And they're quick, they're snappy, you remember them. Like, the soundtrack is amazing. The other thing that I really loved about Snow White, kind of watching it in this movie review frame of mind now, not just watching it for entertainment. I did enjoy it as well, but The animation for 1937 is actually like really phenomenal. I was watching, in particular when I really thought this was the scene where it's at the very beginning where the evil queen has her cloak and the wind's like blowing through her garments while she's looking into the looking glass or the mirror, and just the ripples from the wind and her movements are fluid. Like, clearly they'd been working with Mickey Mouse for a while. They did a couple of kind of short cartoons at that point, but I feel like for their first like feature-length film with a princess, like, it was just amazing to watch back on this and still find the quality of the animation good, especially with Pixar and everything that they're doing now. The other thing that I wanted to say was a happy, at the very beginning, like during the credits, there's a snippet, it's like a written note from Walt Disney thanking the people that had put in all the time and hard work into the film, which just like filled my heart. It was just so warming. I've learned so much about Walt Disney, and one thing that just I felt seeing that note was that he was just genuinely in love with the people that he worked with at that time period and his animators, and like just really cared about the products and what they were giving to us to view. So those are my big three things that I just really loved about the film, that I took away from it. Moving into some of the dopier things, of course, while I love the songs, Snow White's voice bothers me. She has a very classic sound. The vibrato I don't mind. The high-pitchedness is fine, especially for her age, but she just goes up and down and she sounds almost over animated in certain parts. Like going back to the Falling in Love, like, was it hard to do? She goes, oh, it was very easy. Like, she almost sounds goofy in that particular part. And then in the scene where she's eaten the apple, the animation is only on the evil queen as the peddler. You can't see Snow White's face, so there has to be some kind of sound, right? Like, we have to be able to visualize what's happening to Snow White even though we can't see her. Totally get that. But the sounds that she's making in her death are just ridiculous. Like, she's just like, like, it's just not believable. Like, I'm just laughing this entire time. And of course, voice acting has come a long way. The standards of voice acting has come a long way in animation in general, but just her reactions with her voice acting are just, I can't with it. I think the only other dopey thing that I could really think of was just the prince situation. Of course, like, we all know the, like, damsel in distress or whatever, but like, it just seems that we didn't get enough of the prince interaction in this story, and I'll go into the history of it as well, but like, we see the prince at the beginning when she's at the wishing well. She said, like, she wants to fall in love, so of course he trespasses into their castle grounds and sings her a song, and she falls in love, and then she runs away. Now, cut to the end, they don't speak. We have no idea if he's even out searching for her. And he rides up on a horse, supposedly by accident, and just like mouth kisses her and then whisks her away. Like, just that whole plot line of the man being involved, like the prince and her romantic situation, just doesn't seem there's just a lot of plot holes there. Like, I'm just not convinced that he actually loves her. He's like just crossing the line of consent here a little bit, which I know we weren't in a time of PC back then, but just not a big fan of just how that all worked. I also, while I was explaining that, the other thing that I laughed at so hard because it was just so ridiculous was at the beginning, they do the explanation through visual words on the screen, introducing us to the story, which is totally fine for the time. They open up the storybook, which I love that. And they say, like, the queen has dressed her Snow White in rags because she wants to, like, diminish her, basically. So they cut to a scene of Snow White cleaning the steps, but the steps are outside. Like, she's literally got a brush in her hand, like, cleaning with soap and water, like, the outside steps into the castle. I'm like, now you're just giving her busy work, okay? Like, who actually needs to clean the steps outside? We don't even do that. Like, maybe if we have a pressure washer available, but, like, nobody does that. You don't actually need that. So I thought that that was a little, a little ridiculous. Those are just the main happies and dopies of just, like, what stood out to me overall. Now, when I'm watching movies, there's a particular person or character that always stands out the most to me. And for the purposes of my review, I've decided to call them the VMP. So that is the very magical person, a very magical character. It doesn't necessarily have to be a human. But after watching the movie, I took some time, wrote down some notes, and what it really boils down to is, who did I fall in love with the most? Who provided a lot to the story? And who displayed characteristics that I find entertaining? So this week's VMP for Snow White, of course, is going to be Grumpy. Not a huge surprise, I don't think. Snow White, while she's the titular character, like, she doesn't provide that much other than her name, in my opinion, as far as entertainment goes. Grumpy is my VMP for multiple reasons. One, he's just hysterical. Like, just the mood that he's in, he just, like, provides a lot of comedic relief. Dopey does too, but in a more slapstick way, while Grumpy is a little bit more witty. He provides, like, intelligent humor, which I'm all about. I also like the way that he applied himself to the storyline itself. So when we are in the scene where he shows up with his roommates, is what we'll call them, they're all skeptical of the situation. They're all a little scared, but when they find out who it is that's in the house, the rest of the dudes are like, oh my god, it's a princess, like, we're in love with her. And he's just like, you know, she's still a stranger in our house, right? He has the most realistic reaction to the situation at hand, which I greatly appreciate. But he's not unwilling to bargain and negotiate for her staying there. So I do appreciate that. Then on the flip side, while they only all have one night together, he seems to still, like, fall in love with her a little bit, just not in the obvious ways that the rest of the group does. He, of course, when they go off to work, he, like, by himself, like, cleans off his head and, like, puts his hat on and acts all grumpy, but still wants a kiss. And I think that that's, like, applicable to today. Like, there's so many stories, and, like, the girl is the one that's desperate or, like, tries to get the man to fall in love with them, where, like, this is one of the first and only male characters that we're seeing that's, like, super vulnerable, but also tries to like play it off like he's super macho. Like it seems like a real man. He's playing hard to get, but he secretly wants the girl to fall in love with him or show him affection in some way. So I do love that about him. And then when the group of dwarves finds out, or the woodland creatures convince them to come back because Snow White's in trouble, he is the one to take charge. He's the one to lead the charge back into the forest to go back and save her. He's the first one to jump on a deer. He is ready to jump in and do what's right and rescue Snow White. So I think I don't think it's a romantic thing, I think it's more that just he cares so much about her safety. He was the one that warned her not to let anybody in the house, that I think that this is the male-female dynamic that is more respected, in my opinion, than Prince coming to save her. So that's my VMP. Grumpy, he's hysterical, he's the one that makes it all happen, in my opinion. If you know me personally, if you're watching this, you know that I like to understand origin stories. Like if there's ever a phrase or colloquialism that we commonly use, I'd like to understand, like, how did we get there? Where did this come to be? So of course, with that being said, I like to do a little research when I'm reviewing these types of movies, especially classic ones, to really understand how we got to this point. How did we get to the end of the movie when they closed the book? Where did it all come from? So I like to call this segment magical history, or magical moments in time. Haven't really landed on what I want to call this yet, but I know that magic will be thrown in there somewhere. If it were multiple choice, you would be able to pick out that this is a Brothers Grimm story. It is a German story. There's been a couple iterations that the brothers have done on their own, but the original story, I had to write this down because I'm probably gonna butcher it, and you can absolutely tell me that I'm wrong. But the original story in German, also called Snow White, is Schneewittchen. Of course, one of the major differences that you could probably also assume if you're familiar with any of the Brothers Grimm stories is that it's very dark and very murdery, which I guess technically isn't a difference. I mean, right off the bat, the evil queen's trying to murder Homegirl, so we can only assume that it's probably going to be lined up pretty well. I actually read the full story, or the English translation of the story, and there's not too many huge differences, like, especially for someone who likes movies that have been adapted from books and finding the differences between the two. So I wrote down some notes about the differences between the Disney movie that we all know and love, and then of course the Brothers Grimm version of this story. So if I look down a lot, it's because I'm referring back to these notes. You can see I wrote a list and then kind of revisited a few side notes, so gonna try to keep this as smooth as possible. I think I need to take a sip out of my mini cup. I'm keeping very on brand here. So while it's very murdery either way, Brothers Grimm takes it to a whole new level. In the original story, when the evil queen asks the huntsman to basically go out back and kill her, she doesn't ask for her heart. She still asks for some organs, but she's asking for Snow White's lungs and liver, which seems super gross either way. But when it goes through, he of course doesn't kill Snow White. She actually is the one to beg for her life in the Brothers Grimm story, whereas in the Disney version, he's just like, I can't do it. your stepmother's trying to kill you, run away, run away. And this time she's like, don't kill me, I'll just run away, we can forget this all ever happened. And he's like, sweet, peace out. Crap, I still have to come up with lungs and a liver somehow. There's a bear that just happens to walk by, and you know, 16-year-old girl, bear, probably have the same size lungs and liver. Who knows? I actually don't know if they do, but I can only assume that a bear has larger organs. So he kills the bear, takes back the lungs and liver. She has the cook add some salt and like cook up these organs, and she eats them, thinking that this is going to not only just getting rid of Snow White, but eating her organs will help her become the fairest of them all, which is just some like black magic shit that I'm just not prepared for. And we don't hear from Evil Queen for a hot minute. She still runs through the woods. She finds the cottage, but she doesn't have any woodland creature friends to help her find her way. So she does it all on her own. 16-year-old girl wandering through the woods happens upon this cute little cottage. She goes in, but rather than cleaning, she kind of starts like making a hot mess in there. She takes, of course, it's still not clean, but she takes food off of each person's plate. So there's 7 meals that have still been left, and then takes a nap. So she still falls asleep. The dwarves come back, and it's kind of like a Goldilocks situation. They're like, one's been sitting in my chair, who's been eating my soup? Like they clearly notice that something's up. So they go into the bedroom. They realize that she's there. She's only sleeping in one bed. They don't even wake her up. They're just like, oh, there's a stranger, we'll just let her sleep. They wake up in the morning. They still make a deal. She'll do all the housekeeping, sewing, whatever. And so they decide to let her stay. In the Brothers Grimm story, there's still a poison apple, but the Evil Queen takes a couple tries to actually like kill her. So it's so ridiculous because the first try, the Evil Queen brings like a lace bodice and literally convinces her to let her inside, and then basically like squeezes her to death, like ties it so tight that Snow White can't breathe, and then she faints and falls on the floor. So she's out, and she's like, yeah, I did it, I killed a bitch. Clearly didn't check to see if she was still kind of sort of breathing or had a pulse, because the dwarves come back and just like cut the bodice open, and Snow White breathes, and then she's fine. It didn't really have that great of an impact. Evil Queen says to the mirror, who's the fairest one of all? He's like, Snow White, duh, like she's still alive. Comes back with a poisonous comb, puts poison on the comb, brushes her hair, leaves the comb in, makes Snow White pass out again. She falls on the floor. It's just like, yippity doo dah, gonna go back. I killed her. The dwarves come back. They just take the comb out of her hair, and then she's fine. Like, you're clearly not that smart, Evil Queen. Like, if you were really like a true witch, like get on some Hermione level and like use your brain. So then finally she's like, okay, I've got to get the poison in her body. Creates a poison apple. It's half white and half red. The red side is the poison side. Goes back to Snow White. Snow White's like, like I'm not letting anybody in. And Evil Queen in her disguise is like, oh, I'll eat the other half of the apple. And eats the white side. And Snow White's like, oh, then it's fine. And then she eats the red side and then dies. Or goes into a sleeping death, or whatever they want to call it. So the dwarves come back. They can't revive her, so they just assume that she's dead. They still put her in a glass coffin, which is an interesting thing that they've decided to keep in the movie. Put her in the woods. The prince comes by and just stumbles upon the cottage. They haven't even met up until this point. The dwarves tell him what's going on. The prince is like, let me have her. I'll keep her safe. She'll be my most prized possession. which is so creepy. Like, don't worry, I'll stare at her and she'll be fine. Like, that, anyway. So they're like, oh, you really love her, we'll let you have her body. So he gets some people to come by, like they're carrying her, and then the people carrying her trip over something in the woods because like roots and shit, and that dislodges the poison apple chunk that's been in her throat this entire time, and then she's fine. She wakes up, Prince professes his love and asks her to marry him, like off the bat, and she's like, yeah, that sounds great, let's get married. First of all, why didn't anybody try the Heimlich maneuver any of these times? Like, we could have avoided ourselves a whole lot of like fake death. Second, if it were truly a poison apple, just a chunk like would have just choked her, but the poison would have still entered her body. Like, that part seems like there's some plot holes in there. But they go off, they get married, they have a wedding. The evil queen says, who's the fairest one of all, to the mirror. I know, it's so crazy. Come on. Says, who's the fairest one of all? The mirror says it's the young queen, and she's like, I don't know who that is, but I'm gonna go to this wedding and be like, no. And she shows up, and it's Snow White, like, surprise. And the prince realizes who it is. They pull iron shoes out of the fire. First of all, who has iron shoes already in the fire? That just seems a little nuts. But then her punishment is to dance in the iron shoes until she falls down dead. Like, that's brutal and pretty on the spot. Like, there's no, like, she clearly earned it. Like, she tried to have his new wife murdered, but like, whatever. It just seems pretty drastic. Anyway, she's dead. They live happily ever after. We never find out what happened to the huntsman. I didn't watch the Kristen Stewart version, so I'm sure that has a more defined ending for that particular character. But basically, I just assume that he's dead. If in either situation he wasn't able to deliver and the evil queen found out and found him, then he's like dead, gone. That's really how it started. It started a little bit more dramatic than the version that we all grew up with in the Disney universe. So I think Disney probably saved us a lot of heartache in our early years. Other than that, I mean, that's really what I've got. I also kind of looked into, is it based off a real person? Is there a true origin story out there anywhere? Didn't really get a solid answer, so I didn't really feel comfortable like diving deep into all those different possibilities because they're endless. But if you want to do the research on your own, definitely feel free. There's lots of information on Snow White out there. But I love the story. I love all of the characters. I think they're just a lot of fun, especially as a Disney park goer myself. I enjoy seeing those characters at the park and meeting them. Love me some Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. Hits me right in the feels when I'm going through the mine itself with all the animation, the animatronics that they've got going on in there, and the visuals. It's just really fun. So this movie, I think, while appropriate anyway because it's the beginning of our adventure in release date order, I think it's just a really great start to the series. I'm excited to keep going. There's a couple on here that, of course, that I've seen over and over again, but there's a few new ones that I haven't seen, so I'm excited to dive deeper into that. Definitely let me know if this is something that you guys are enjoying, if there's anything else that you want to hear as far as my take on these different movies, if there's kind of an area that I'm not touching on that you guys think that should kind of be included in my rotation, absolutely feel free to let me know. Otherwise, this is your magical movie review of 1937 Snow White, and I hope you guys have a magical night.